thank you for joining us in today's panel discussion. So my name is Jiamin and I'm the lead for Parcel Monitor, the leading platform for e-commerce logistics insights. So today we're very excited to have with us a fantastic lineup of speakers from the retail and fashion space. And we'll be discussing on how and why is sustainability no longer just an option, but a necessity. So just a little housekeeping before we get started. So if you get any questions during the presentation, please type them in the question box in the LinkedIn live comments section or the LinkedIn event chat. So if there's some time at the end of the session, I will address them or we'll address them after the session. So without further ado, we'll hand the time over to our moderator and sustainable supply chain expert, Pia. Pia, take it away.
Thank you, Jamin. Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome everyone to today's session on why sustainability is no longer an option, but a necessity. And we all might know that the importance and role of sustainability has changed on a global scale and is affecting businesses and organizations all over the world. So today we're going to have a discussion with our panelists about the developments, drivers, and in particular get some insights from them on sustainability and circularity. So as already mentioned, if you have some questions, just type them in the chat and we're going to respond to them afterwards in the Q&A session. But now I'd like to welcome also our panelists, which are quite international. So we got Stockholm dialing in, Melbourne and Hong Kong. So I would like you to invite you to start. So maybe Sarah, you want to start to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Garner, and I'm the founder of Recycle. And Recycle is an online consignment platform for kids and maternity wear.
Great. Thank you. Who wants to go next? Nina, you.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. Great that you're tuning in. My name is Nina Sharati, and I'm founder of Circulate Transparency and Donate Tower. What we do is basically provide knowledge and expert advisory to startups or basically anyone who wants to get in line with the SDGs.
Great. Thanks so much. Chris, what about you?
Hi, Chris Foley. I'm Head of Energy and Environment for Kmart Group. Kmart Group is an Australian-based retail operation under the brands of Kmart and Target in Australia and New Zealand, with sourcing operations up throughout Asia.
Thank you. And to start off with a maybe simple question, but maybe even not so simple to answer to, what does sustainability mean to you? Chris, you want to continue?
Sure. Certainly from our business's point of view, I suppose in one sentence, sustainability for us is really about understanding and then managing the ways we impact the communities and environments that we operate in. Ultimately, we need to ensure that we continue to create value into the future, and that's where sustainability starts.
Thank you. Sarah, what does sustainability mean to you?
Sure. I think about it in terms of the next generation and in the context of the environment. So not depleting our resources, not creating a negative environmental impact, and probably most importantly, not impacting the future of the next generation by our needs and wants.
Thank you. And Nina, what does sustainability mean to you?
Sustainability basically means that you're respectful of environmental people, and if you're a business, that you create value within the boundaries that the planet has, and hopefully you leave the planet in the same way as you find it, but preferably in a better place than you found it.
Perfect. Thank you. And so thinking about the title of today's session, a necessity, no longer an option, what you said already, what I heard from your answers, impact, value, next generation. So how is sustainability in that context a necessity to organizations? Who wants to start? Chris, please.
Sure. Thanks, Pia. I think it's from an organization point of view or a business point of view, ultimately we need to achieve long-term returns for our investors. We need to deliver customers with the product features and integrity that they desire. We need to attract and retain quality employees. We need to be efficient with our operations. I mean, sustainability is great for business if you get it right. We need to be competitive and or have a point of difference. We need to create new opportunities. We need to attract investors. We need to secure finance at attractive rates, and all of those drivers make sustainability absolutely essential. Without sustainability, you're not going to have any of the above.
Thank you. And Nina, what's your opinion on that?
I think if you, unless you have been in the woods with no access to any information, I think it would be hard to realize the state of our planet and society right now, and where we are in terms of climate. Just looking at the signs we have seen this past summer with crazy temperatures in places like Seattle and fires in Greece and Turkey, I think it's totally, it's hard to not understand it. But looking into like the climate change and the rise of the sea levels that are foreseen happening in near future, and that it will affect the Southeast Asian coastline, where majority of manufacturing is happening and majority of the workforce is within the fashion industry. It's really difficult not understanding and putting two and two together that you need to act in a different way to actually address these issues, but also just baseline of there will be limitations in resources. Cotton alone will be scarcity and the prices will increase. At the same time, you have legislations coming up in EU, and also China is looking into similar ones, and not to forget the increase of awareness in customers and the younger generation, and where they're demanding brands to, and companies to take responsibility in a totally different level.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Sarah, what about you? What's your opinion on that?
I think that was very well covered, but yeah, I do think companies will start to face obsolescence if they're not addressing these issues, and now the double bottom line is becoming quite essential to consumers. So the focus, obviously, on profit, but also purpose, and ensuring that at the core you have shared value with your stakeholders and consumers. And I think ultimately that will drive long-term value and allow companies to endure and survive and not face obsolescence, because I think there's just a natural weeding out now from consumers, and they're really aligning with companies that are trying to put sustainability at the core.
Thank you. So I think what we see is that we all align on the fact that we need to take action, that we're seeing what's happening around us and on a global scale, and that we need to drive change and transformation towards more sustainability and sustainable business. But I think we also agree on the fact, and I think also already Chris mentioned a few of the drivers, but they also look like a bit like the challenges. So when we're talking about all the topics that companies and organizations need to cover now and need to take care of within their processes and in their management systems, it doesn't look like an easy and quick job to do. So which other challenges are you seeing, are you facing within your industry? And maybe Sarah, we just continue with you in the fashion industry, and Nina, then you afterwards, please.
Sure, it's quite a big question, but for us, we operate in the secondhand space, so we're not creating anything new, but there is sort of a natural tension, I think, across fashion for any brand that positions themselves as sustainable and tries to do right by the environment. There's a natural tension between sales and performance and your sustainability efforts, because even though we're operating in the kids space, which has a natural requirement for more as your kids grow, so we are addressing a need. Ultimately, as a business, we are also trying to meet our sales targets. So there is, I think, a tension always between businesses that are trying to do right by the environment, but also meet their sales and profitability targets. So I think that is always a bit of a challenge. And then the fashion industry at large, we're trying to resolve part of the reuse portion of circularity, but the fashion industry has a huge amount to solve for if we're going to get to true circularity. So what we're doing as a model is just the reuse stage. To get to true circularity, there has to be a complete rethink about the whole supply chain and how we design. So I think there's a huge battle ahead of us in order to achieve circularity or achieve environmentally sustainable fashion. But it's an exciting time because consumers are changing and mindsets are changing, and the pressure is on to find those solutions. And then just one, yeah.
No, go ahead, please.
Just one other challenge, just for our model in particular, which resale is growing very quickly, is just the operational scalability of a model like ours, because the whole industry was built around depth of SKUs and efficiencies around volume, and operating a model with unique items at scale presents unique challenges, and so there's a need for these types of solutions, but technology is not necessarily keeping pace. And also the way that production is happening to support these models isn't necessarily all congruent yet. So yeah, a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. Nina, what do you think?
I disagree. No, I'm kidding. I think Sarah mentioned all of the things, but if I were to build on it, it's more, I think one thing that Sarah mentioned is the whole aspect of how we measure success in business is one of the major challenges. We have a economical growth mindset, which is very much based on a linear model, but with a mindset of thinking that we should grow infinitely. Like there's constantly this idea of producing more and more and expanding and growing more and more and more. And nothing, if you would look into nature, there's nothing that grows like that. Maybe, if I'm being blunt, maybe cancer. So like that whole economical system that is baseline of how we do business is a challenge itself. So there needs to be a disruption there, where we have a KPIs and measurement system that from the beginning keeps the planetary boundaries and also keeps the people perspective in mind. But adding to that, the whole idea of lack of innovation, if looking into creating new type of garments, still then there is a lack of innovation in terms of materials or fabrics, or how we, what kind of chemicals we are using and dyeing. And then if you look into the whole circular as a system, what Sarah also mentioned, that kind of infrastructure that enables that circular system is not in place. It's a lot that needs to be done there. But also going back, looping it back to that economical perspective, we also see where we even have innovation, and there are not always companies who are willing to invest in them, and there's it collides with the short-term goals with the long-term goals, kind of doesn't match up. So the expectation of a price of a new innovative material is to kind of meet a material that has been optimized and sub-optimized for 100 years, and that's just not reasonable. So there are multiple challenges. On top of that, we need to have a new type of regulatory system in place to harmonize the industry. And sorry, I need to mention one thing: standards. Just the fact that when we are talking about sustainability, what does it mean? And it has been up to each and every brand to identify it. So how do you actually measure impact, and how are you following science-based targets or not? So there are lots to be done.
Yeah, and mentioning the standards, I think that's a very, very important point that you brought up. Chris, what about your business, your organization at Kmart?
Yeah, no, I certainly echo everything that Nina and Sarah have just said, and not wanting to replay. I'll try to touch on a couple of things that are slightly different. I think one call out is that today everything is now non-negotiable. You have to be ethical. You've got to have all the ethics in place. That's non-negotiable. You need to be circular. You need climate resilience. You need plastic-free, waste-free. You can't choose as a responsible. If you want to be a responsible retailer that's relevant, or a responsible brand owner that's relevant, and the list goes on. I think one of the challenges that we're also facing is in our section of the market that customers want sustainability, but they also want low prices, and that sets up a real challenge. And how do you respond to that as a brand or a retailer? So for us, we're having to use our scale to source ethically. We're by no means as big as some of the global brands, but we've got a reasonable size and sourcing infrastructure and technology base to allow us to source and change how we do our business, how we engage our supply chain, how we engage our factories to get whether it be the ethical elements or the challenge the textiles that are being used, as Nina was mentioning, increase the recycled content, totally transform the way we design or think about a product or a garment. So there's no shortage of challenge landing all of that at a price that customers are prepared to pay for. Beyond that, we've also got data, and it's sort of a slightly different slant on the comments made by Nina. I think one of the challenges with sustainability as a brand owner is that we need data that we've never had before. We've never collected a lot of the data. Suppliers or factories might not have actually, they may not be collecting it themselves. And that's about being able to validate, whether it be recycled content claims, validate emissions intensity claims, track performance. We're having to create new data sets and push and challenge our suppliers to give us more information than we've ever had before. So it's an opportunities-rich environment with all of those challenges.
Thank you. I think you brought up two very, very important points. One is the data, I think, and also the standards that mentioned Sarah before. To get the data, we first need transparency. And even to get transparency can be a huge challenge to companies when we're not talking about the first row of suppliers, so tier one, but going beyond that to get that transparency in a first step, and then to get the data and at the end have the benchmarkable standards that we can agree on. And the other point is, which I find quite interesting, I've been reading some studies over the past years, and we've seen surveys on ongoing changing in customers' behavior and preferences for sustainable products, and even the customers' will to pay more for sustainable products. And I've been always waiting for the huge change, for the big transformation of the markets. And I think I'm still waiting. And these studies seem to have been, in my personal opinion, more talking the walk instead of walking the talk, without having a real impact on retail or even other sectors as manufacturing. Do you now see a shift towards walk the talk, or is it still remaining the same? You mentioned that, Chris mentioned that customers still want to have lower prices or the same price for sustainable products. So Sarah, what's your opinion from a second-hand perspective?
Sure. Yeah, I think customers are quite uniform, or at least mass consumers are quite uniform in that they won't choose an inferior product for a higher price tag. So in the past, I think products that sat on the shelves, and it's particularly with sustainable fashion, it always felt very niche. If you were shopping sustainably and you were making probably a compromise in terms of either design or quality, because it was not as soft, or there was some sort of compromise that you would be making in relation to your ethical positioning, that has changed. I do think that now there are bigger brands and better offerings in terms of sustainable or alternative fashion that are for the mass consumer. But typically a customer won't choose environmental reasons as the only reason to choose a product. It has to go hand in hand with the design they like, the price point that they'll accept, and it has to be superior basically to the alternative, or at least equal to the alternative. With secondhand, I think there's been a lot of progress in making shifts, because we're addressing basically in our case a fast fashion price point, but for designer goods. So we're seeing quite a large transformation of purchase behavior, where those that would have shopped at the lowest price point are now choosing to convert that same wallet share, but for higher quality brands, and choosing secondhand, both for the quality and the brand accessibility, but in equal portions. They feel really good about the fact that they're doing something with low to no impact. So I think as long as you're presenting an option with a very obvious proposition with benefits, then there have been shifts, but I don't think consumers are yet ready to make compromise in order to shop with the environment as their sole discretion. So we are seeing changes, but I think you can see it still in fast fashion that the price point is too much of a lure for consumers to make more responsible choices.
Absolutely. Chris, you brought this topic up. Do you have anything to add?
Look, I think it's really beholden now on responsible brand owners. In the first instance, if you want to retain your customers, you have to improve the sustainability of your offering. And in the first instance, that's a challenge for a lot. How do you redefine? How do you rethink, redesign, use new materials, source new factories, and do that within a price point that customers will tolerate? It's a challenge. Let's not kid ourselves, but we have to do it. And it's a long haul. It's a long journey. So again, for us, that's where we're attempting to use our scale and internal design capabilities and sourcing functions to make change happen, without totally disrupting the business model as far as the value point for customers. But again, customers do want everything, and so they should. It's the customer's always right in the context of the environment.
Thank you. Nina, what do you think? What's your experience?
I mean, what has been mentioned in terms of the customer is not prioritizing, and I'm air quoting sustainable garments, because based on what we said before, it's very hard to actually understand what that means right now, and if over style or fashion and what actually makes them look and feel good, right? So, but I want to challenge that question. I think one of the most sustainable product, unless it's something that absorbs CO2 emission and turns into a new product, is the one that is not produced. And the best product you can buy to be sustainable is the one you don't buy as a customer. So I think that this whole idea of like keeping up with the trends and buying more and more and more, that's where we need to challenge the behavior change. And the models that are coming up, as Sarah's mentioning, the secondhand, how can we promote that type of kind of consumption when it's needed, but also kind of bring back the whole, change the behavior maybe from being trendy to becoming stylish. A style can be sustainable in another way. You can still look and feel good and be happy about yourself without over consuming. So I think there's a lot to be done in this area, and I want to challenge the industry to kind of first looking to new business models that is promoting this new way of providing customers garments, either as rental models or resale models or any other new innovative idea out there. There are a lot of digital fashion that is popping up where you don't even buy a garment. You buy a digital garment that you wear on your social media and you don't actually have an actual garment. So there's a lot to be explored here, and that's something that excites me. And also I would like to see a behavior shift and behavior change that is moving from you need a party top for the weekend to like having a style that lasts, and how do you then can take care of it with mending and maybe up designing, etc.
Yeah, thanks for bringing this point up, because I think that's important that we see the two sides of the medal, that we do not have only the production side, but also the consumer side. And when we're talking about sustainability, I think we need to be on both sides as sustainable as possible, and which means that we as customers and consumers also need to rethink what our decisions, our buying decisions. And as you said, maybe then sometimes buying less is more sustainable than buying sustainable. I want to bring up one topic which I know you all warmly feel about and which has already been mentioned. And when we're now looking back from the consumer perspective to the producing side, circular economy is one of the components of the main topics and key areas in this immense broad field of sustainability. What is circular economy or circularity, and what can you share about that, Nina?
So before I start going into circular economy, it's easier to talk about the linear economy that we have in place, which is basically you start with the idea, you design it, you source for it, and within the manufacturing or retail, you make like X amount of copies of that design, and then you sell it to the customers, and the customer buy it normally for a very short period of time, and when they're done with it, they discard it. And that kind of idea of having infinite amount of resources on a planet with finite resources doesn't really add up. That's how we get these piles and piles of mountains with discarded garments. So what circular economy is suggesting is that already in that whole idea process or design process, you keep in mind how you can design a product in a way that you can prolongate the lifetime of it for it to be used as long as possible, and also and add new type of models in terms of resell, rental, mending to prolongate that lifespan, but also design it in a way that when you're then done with it and it's no longer usable, you can easily dismantle it and create and feed it in as a resource into loop it back as a resource so you can create a new product from it. So that's whole circular economy's idea, and it's very much have to do with basically, if you look at our planet, how things work. So you have trees that grows every season, then the leaves are fallen down and it creates some kind of like nourish, and it just goes in loops and loops. So that's kind of the basic idea. So yeah, that was the question, right? What is circular economy?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And since this was covering it, as in my opinion, quite good. Sarah, Chris, do you have anything to add or want to share anything on circularity from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's what we're driving towards. We're still at the reuse stage, so sort of 3/4 of the circular model, and our ambition is to get to full circularity and use end-of-life garments as an input for something new. Unfortunately, garments are not made with end-of-life in mind. So there are some technologies that allow for sorting by color, by fabric type in order to spin new yarns. But because most of fashion is made from plastic and synthetics, those are very difficult to use again as new yarn. They're not very strong, and so there isn't a lot that can be done with them. So unfortunately, even though the technology is starting to emerge, the way that we're designing and the materials that we're using in garments is not lending itself to some of these new technologies that would allow for the recycling to take place. So I think, just as Nina said, it's at that inception stage, and I'm very much looking forward to, and I hope we could potentially be one of those brands, but I want to see that starting in the industry where brands are designing for end of life, and then platforms like ours or anyone who's involved in circularity can participate in that recycling step, and that is the future. The other part that really enables some of that circularity, or at least propels even the resale stage, is designing in technology from the beginning. So we haven't touched on like blockchain, but designing with things like blockchain, where you can store information at each stage of the supply chain, and also store information like photograph or price. Those would all enable more circularity to take place.
Awesome, thank you. Chris.
I think Nina's summary of circularity was actually pretty good. Without, I'm happy to move to the next question. It is waste elimination, reuse, recycling, etc.
Yeah, great. So with Chris, we had a quick chat before this webinar, and he shared some great insights, and that's why I'm super happy to be able to ask this question. Can you share any insights on your company, on your business, what you are doing on circular economy, and how are you implementing it, and what are the challenges, but also the goals, the target, which success are you already seeing?
I think a really good example of sort of circularity or circular economy at work. We have, as a retailer, we sell several 100 million garments a year. And in a lot of retailers, each one of those garments comes with a coat hanger that leaves the shop, goes home with the customer, and goes into the waste bin. We've actually got a system in place that reuses those, and literally hundreds of millions of plastic coat hangers. They're made from recycled plastic, purpose-built, purpose-designed. They don't leave the store, and they go back up into our supply chain, where garments are put back on them, come back into the store, and the coat hangers just keep going around and around. And when they get damaged, they get reground, made back into coat hangers. But that's an example in the context of what can circularity look like. It's just one example. Around recycled content in the context of apparel, we've got commitments that by 2025, 50% of the polyester and nylon that we use in our own brand clothing ranges will be recycled material. And we've applied that, we're applying it already. And it's hugely well received across activewear, outerwear, denim, swimwear, and our bedding ranges. In the context of obviously packaging's just a no-brainer. Optimizing, eliminating. We've got commitments that certainly all of our packaging by 2025, or actually by December 2023, meets a whole range of obligations that we've committed to within the Australian and New Zealand markets. For plastic, for hard goods, as a general merchant, by 2025 we won't have any. We've just eliminated a whole range of single-use plastic items from our products. I mean, you eliminate hundreds of millions of bits of plastic just by making some really intelligent decisions around finding substitutes to say wasteful single-use items. But for us, plastic, we're removing problematic. We've committed to removing problematic plastics from our product ranges by 2025. And that can have a profound impact on both the waste and recycling streams, what ends up in the litter, but also the recyclability of polymers. And we're actually really trying to now rethink how we use plastic. Has some negatives, but it also has some positives. So where is it appropriate? When is it appropriate to use polymers or plastic? How can that be used for good, not environmental evil? So there's a lot of opportunities out there, but there are also a lot of challenges. We're pushing new boundaries all the time.
Great. Thanks for sharing these insights. We're having a lot of questions from our participants watching us. So I'd like to have one last question to you three, and then step into the Q&A session so we have enough time to respond to that questions. The last question would be, how can businesses start circular thinking within their organizations, and how can they step up to sustainability by doing so? So Sarah, what do you want to say about that?
Yeah, just keep it very short. I just think it starts with looking at your end of life and then working backwards. So thinking about where your products are ending up after their useful life, and then trying to work backwards to inception.
Thank you. And Nina?
I think it needs to really come from the top. It needs to, like that whole sustainability agenda, including circular economy, it needs to kind of become embedded in the overall strategy and the goal of the company. Otherwise, you can have teams trying to push it from bottom up, but without no resources or not having any alignment with the top decisions and goals, you won't get far. So I would suggest start there. Make sure you embed it in your overall strategy, set clear goals, and then you start bringing in expertise, both in-house and externally, to support you in identifying what does that mean for you. Where should you start, based on what kind of business you have, what kind of setups you have to create impact, and take it from there.
Thank you. Chris? What do you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think Nina just nailed it. The whole if you don't have that internal alignment from the top down, you're going to get a whole lot of team members feeling really jaded and disgruntled, trying to do the right thing, driven by passion, driven by information that they've got, hitting their head, trying to break through. So you certainly need internal, as high as you can go, senior leadership championing this cause, whether it be circularity or whether it be climate action. If it doesn't come from the top, it's going to be very low. It's going to be a very slow journey.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for this first part. So I'm really excited about all these questions that we got. I'd like to start with one which is super long. So give me just a second. It's Adriana, and she's working in logistics, and she's seeing all the challenges that we're having, and she thinks that the biggest one is changing the narrative. So she's saying the whole business environment has been created for single-use packaging and has been optimized for it. And though companies want to become more sustainable, that is often very expensive and difficult. And there is little evidence of high requests from end consumers. How would you approach this change in the narrative? Who wants first? Any questions on that?
So the question is how you would change on the narrative of the cheaper usage of packaging?
On the costs, I think, on the costs, and to change the from linear to circular and sustainable. That's how I understood it.
What she's pointing her finger on is one of the biggest challenges that we have discussed, and also what Sarah mentioned, that is the short-term kind of goals versus maybe long-term goals that are set. Firstly, I would ask, do you even have a goal set within the company for you to shift towards more like sustainable packaging? Secondly, there will be, that's where you need to start. And when you start with that, then you need to start taking investments to getting there, right? So it won't happen by itself. You can't compare a system or a model that has been optimized for 100 years to match up with the same price point as something very new. Maybe some of these solutions have been around maybe 5 years. Of course, that's not going to be feasible. So that's where companies and organizations needs to start taking investments, and unfortunately that's not always happening. That's where legislations come in and have a potential of creating this harmonized playing field so that everyone needs to live up to those new standards or way of working.
Thank you. Sarah, you want to add something?
This is maybe a little bit off topic, but Chris, I think, made a really good case for cost savings associated with some of these principles. So obviously, recycling 100 million hangers is actually really good for the bottom line, and is also taking a stance for the customer on sustainability. But that can also be, you can implement very creative solutions in a big organization to offset some of those bigger costs associated with sustainable packaging. For instance, as a company, you can create a recycling program where other companies are recycling their goods with you, or individuals are recycling their goods with you, and then unsell those recycled goods as an offset to whatever type of initiative you're trying to put in place. So I do think there are creative solutions to offset some of the increased costs. And yeah, Chris's example is a great one. That's good for the bottom line, and they can probably implement more sustainable packaging as a result of some of those savings, because sustainable packaging is still very expensive. It's typically three times the cost of the alternative.
Exactly. We have another question from Jeremy. I think we covered already some important parts of that question. So it's about evolution versus revolution. And we've seen this conscious consumer model and driven by customers and brands. And he's asking what would be needed for a really radical change in consumerism. We already mentioned regulations, but he's asking government, climate disasters. What do you think? Do we even need this radical change after what we have heard before?
I think it's actually been interesting just with COVID, and just what COVID's actually done to sort of force the world to take a step back. We certainly are observing that it's actually amplified the sustainability agenda. And okay, you could argue that there's some increase in the use of single-use plastic packaging and the like, largely driven for health reasons. But in the main, we believe that COVID has certainly amplified the sustainability agenda, and we're seeing that come through, which is exciting. It's also challenging because it is now across a whole range of agenda, but it's certainly been amplified in the last 2 years.
Thank you. Sarah, Nina, do you want to add anything to that question?
To answer the question of if enough is being done, the answer is no. There are like numbers showing that the foreseen growth ratio within the fashion industry, or it's going to be much larger than the climate actions that are planned to be taken in the coming 10 to 15 years. And let's say, and the fashion industry is planned to, based on how it's going, it will miss its target with double by 2030 or 2040. I don't have the exact. So it's not enough is being done. That's the fact. But then asking who should be driving it, I think, we have one planet, we all have our responsibility. If you're any position, you can pitch in and do what you can do. As a customer, like every time you shop, you send a signal to the brands of what you want, and they base their next season based on what you're buying. So even if you think this is 10 euros or $100, what changes it makes? It makes a lot of change. There are hundreds of people on the other hand actually following your purchase behavior to plan for the coming season. And as a company, you have a massive opportunity because there will be scarcity of resources. There will be legislations coming up, but if you can actually take the leadership and start shifting and start preparing for this change and taking leadership on that, then you will be on the place where you actually show the way rather than trying to catch up afterwards. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Sarah.
Just I think just going back to radical transparency, or what would prompt radical change. I do think transparency and education is still a big piece of this, where if consumers were faced with, for instance, if they were shopping at Topshop or H&M, if the label on that garment or the blockchain that was associated with the product was able to tell you along the route where that product had been manufactured, how many countries it had passed through, how much each of the workers was paid, how much environmental damage had been done to achieve that output, the longevity of that product or the anticipated longevity of that product, I think it would make people really second guess their purchases. So if you can imagine, like the same as a food label, but if it had all of these elements that we're talking about, I do think that would create radical change. I think consumers are constantly willfully putting the blinders on.
Thank you so much. Nina, Sarah, and Chris, I'd like to thank you very much for this session today, for your insights, for joining me, and Parcel Monitor for organizing that. I'd like to close with one last word, which Nina mentioned before. So not only transparency, but I think we need leadership to drive change and transformation. And I'd like to conclude this session with these words. And thank you all. Thanks for all of you watching us today. Have a great day. Take care and see you soon.